we are at the top of the hour, so we will begin our webinar. And welcome here today. Thank you for attending the webinar, and we'll begin here. Again, the webinar will be where we're going to do three things today. Todd Hubbs is going to provide a marketing outlook. Jonathan Koppas will provide a bit more detail on what's happening on policy as we relate to what's going on here, and then I'm going to go through some of the decisions that you're facing right now. So that's our outline. Again, we thank Illinois Corn for sponsoring this webinar and making it happen. And we will be doing two other webinars next Wednesday and the Wednesday after. Expect pretty much the same outline as today. Marketing outlook, policy outlook, and then finally we'll talk about the decisions that we'll be looking through. Well, in the final webinar, the last of the month, we'll begin to focus on what incomes may look like this year, and the SCO decision at that point in time. So that's our outlook. And Todd, you are going to give us a marketing outlook here.
Thank you, Gary. I'm going to start today with soybeans, and basically, folks, you're just going to see a couple of balance sheet sets for soybeans and corn, not my typical long-winded mini slide presentation. Yesterday, we saw the USDA adjust the 18-19 balance sheet. Soybean exports got lowered 75 million bushels to 1.7 billion. This is right in line with what I'm seeing in my models. You could actually see the exports weaken even more. And we finally seen the ending stocks bust over 1 billion bushels for soybeans. China's still sitting on about 245 million bushels of outstanding sales of beans. Depending on how these trade negotiations go, further deterioration could see this get even uglier, and we could see ending stocks in 18-19 grow some more. In general, on soybeans, I think the uncertainty is to the downside. I know any kind of trade deal can totally change the scenario we're in right now, but I'm not very hopeful at this point that we see any kind of deal anytime soon. So when we're looking forward into 2019-20 marketing year, we got these big stocks we're carrying in, and it comes down to what do we think the acreage is going to be and what do we think the yield's going to be. Yesterday, the USDA stood pat on their acreage, and they stood pat on their yield projection of 49.4 bushels per acre. So they're looking at about a 1.045 carry out for the 19-20 marketing year with almost a 25% stocks to use, and they raised the average farm price 15 cents. That's a bit of a head scratcher. But when I look at their numbers, those are reasonable. I don't know where they're getting 1.95 billion bushels of exports under the current trade scenario we're sitting at. So I've got a couple of balance sheets for 19-20 that I'm going to talk about. One of them, and it's the fourth column over and down, a forecast with no acreage change. I'm fading yield a little bit right now. I've got it at 48.7 bushels per acre. We're getting the beans in quite late in a lot of places in some pretty poor conditions. It's always tough to say what soybean yield will be, but I think it's reasonable to start thinking about downgrading the yield for soybeans this year. So you'll see 48.7 for both of my numbers. And the other supply scenario is 2 million acre gain. Now, right now, as we sit here, I think you're going to see the soybean crop get planted. We got time. The window's opened up. The question is, how many acres of prevent planted soybeans will be done this year? And will we see some switching from corn to soybean acres? That's a big question. I think it might be a wash in the end. So when you're looking at my two columns for the 19-20 projection, I'm sort of leaning toward no to minimal acreage change for soybeans. But keep in mind, when you're thinking about marketing them, we could see more soybean acres this year. When I look at consumption for 19-20, I think that crush number is pretty good at 2.115 billion bushels. But the problem for us, we can't crush our way out of these stocks we're sitting in. There's not going to be a huge expansion in crush. It comes back to exports. I've got it at about 1.8 billion bushels next year. A little bit of strength as we pick up some of these markets as Brazil and Argentina supply China for their lower demand needs under the African swine fever, reduced hog herd, and as they source everywhere else.
Oops.
Gary's doing a runner on me. That's all right. So what I'm looking at is a general that USDA showed ending stocks going down in 1920. I think in all probability we might see them expand a little bit depending on what our acreage is. Under these kind of scenarios, we're looking at stocks to use ratios well above 25%. I don't know how you get above $8 with these kind of carryouts going on. So when you're thinking about marketing your soybeans this year, if you've listened to me or you follow what I write on Farmdoc Daily, under these rallies we've seen recently, I've seen them as pricing opportunities. And I still believe that. I think there's weakness in the soybean market, barring some kind of trade deal.
By the way, a question came up: will this trigger PLC payments? And yes, it will.
Yes, it will.
The PLC reference price is $8.40, so you would be triggering PLC payments. One thing to keep in mind, though, on PLC is it is on base acres, and most of your base acres are much lower than the acres that you're going to plant. So it's not a complete. You don't have an $8.40 hard floor on like what you expect to plant.
All right, let's move to corn real quick. I'm already taking up more time. This is one I think a lot of people are interested in. Yesterday in the 18-19 balance sheet, USDA lowered our exports 100 million bushels. I think that number is pretty close as well based on my models. I'm pretty much where the USDA is on consumption except for feed and residual. We'll see with the June 1st stocks report. I don't think they fully incorporated how they missed the yield last year. We'll see. We'll see when we get that report. At this point, we're looking at carrying out about 2.2 billion bushels in the 18-19 marketing year, and that average price per bushel of $3.60, I think, solid. We've seen a lot of the marketing go through. So what we're looking at is we're in a supply market for corn. What will what will the 1920 supply be? And this is the big one. USDA lowered the acreage 3 million acres due to the late planting. I personally think this is just the beginning of acreage moving out of the corn crop. And they lowered the yield 10 bushels an acre to 166 bushels. I'm okay with that yield. We've been talking 170 here at U of I as a conservative estimate for corn yield in 1920. 166, I'm going to go with that number. You could actually see it move lower. We've planted a record amount of corn in June in some really horrible conditions. So we're basically outside of the historical record. We've never done this before. So it's hard to say what kind of yield we could see. But if we're looking at pollinating in early August, a shortened fill window, maybe not going black clear till November, yield can get tough. So we'll see how it goes as we move through the growing season. For consumption, the USDA has about 14.25 billion bushels of use. Under their supply scenario, these are all reasonable. They faded feed and residual quite a bit, and we're looking at a $3.80 price. They raised it 80 cents. So what you guys are seeing in my slides, and if you could highlight that, the first column, I'm saying there's another 7 million acre loss. So we're down to 82.8 planted acres and a 75.4 harvested for grain with a 166 yield. I've got my carry in slightly higher than USDA, so we're looking at a supply under that scenario of 14.8 billion bushels. At that kind of supply, we're already talking about a bushel loss bigger than what happened in the 2012 drought from 2011 to 2012. This is a bullish scenario for corn by any stretch of the imagination if this kind of acreage loss occurs. I've got some consumption there. I think feed and residual go down, smaller residual, a little bit higher than USDA. Ethanol is a tough one to call. We need ethanol price to go up quite a bit to price it out of the blend. You'll still see the blend go in 1920. My worry for ethanol is if corn prices go up this much and ethanol prices increase, they might price themselves out of the export market. At $5, you're going to see rationing, and it's going to start in the export market, move into ethanol, and you'll see some feed substitution effects. This number could be even more. I've got ending stocks under this acreage scenario at about 1.17 billion bushels and a price of $5. That's where the rationing is going to start. If we lost an additional 3 million acres, so I'm saying 10 million acre loss from what USDA is currently at in the last column, we're going to see some severe rationing. I've lowered feed and residual. I've lowered ethanol a little bit. I've lowered exports significantly. We could be less than 1 billion bushels of ending stocks. And at this point, we're talking I've got 550 for a corn price, and these are cash prices because we are well below 10%, and we could see prices go vertical under this kind of scenario. Now, I'm not saying this is exactly what's going to happen. Anywhere inside these acreages, I'm saying 7 million or 10 million acres. You know, if we only lose another 3 or 4 million acres, I think you're looking at prices in the mid $4. And I'll leave it there because I've taken up my time.
All right, thank you. But overall, bearish corn, bullish.
I got more to say. In general, folks, I think you're going to see some really high volatility over the next few months. And if we see these acreage losses and these yield hits, this is a classic price spike scenario where you see basis strengthen considerably. And I think you might start thinking about marketing multiple years of crops because I think the acreage response next year could be huge.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
All right, there we go. So now to shed some light on our policy situation, Jonathan Koppas.
I don't know that shedding light is the correct way to describe this. I think we remain in a pretty thick fog of unknowns about exactly how these policies are going to play out. But Jim, you want to move this forward, or Gary, move this forward? So what we know, we're going to start with the MFP, the Market Facilitation Program payments, Part 2, and sort of tongue-in-cheek, this year the M seems to stand for mystery, as we have less information out there maybe than is helpful at this point in time. We know that USDA announced they were going to make these payments back in May 23rd. They provided some more information just yesterday or the day before, including clarifying that in order to get an MFP payment, you had to plant a crop on the acres. And so they're clarifying that their legal limits on being able to get creative with the Commodity Credit Corporation authorities requires a planted crop on that. Again, USDA is going to put about $14.5 billion in payments out for this 2019 round of payments. They are saying they're going to use a single county rate. So regardless of what crop you plant, it'll get that acre will get the same payment regardless of the crop. So they're trying to decrease the impact on planting, but it does require that a crop be planted. They've included all Title I commodities at this point. So any commodity we've had listed in the Farm Bill for the ARC or PLC payments are going to be included in this, and that means included in the county rate calculation somehow, and all acres planted, all these crops will receive a payment, and they've added alfalfa. So one of the things this tells us is that the additional funds will be spread across more crops and acres, and that may push down exactly how much each acre receives. The other sort of moderate clarity, if you will, on MFP that just came out was that they may provide, in those cases where the farmer's been prevented from planting the acres but puts in a cover crop, they may add some sort of minimal MFP payment for those acres that are put into a cover crop. And then there's some mention of the need for it's got to be a cover crop for harvest, which may have an issue. Gary, you may have more on this. It may cause issues with your prevent plant insurance. They're encouraging everybody to talk to your insurance agent about that before you do anything. But there's maybe some requirements for a harvest or foraged cover crop in that situation. So bottom line on this, we still don't know a lot of the details around this MFP program and exactly how it will look, how much you will get per acre, and how some of these prevent planted acres will be treated. The final bit of information that I think probably has a big practical implication if you're banking on or thinking about the MFP program payments is to remember that whatever you get will come out in 3 tranches again. So they're limited in how much borrowing authority they have under the CCC. And because of that, they're stretching these out. So there'll be a portion of this. And again, we don't know exactly whether this will be a third, or how this will be apportioned, but some will come out this summer, some in November, and again, a third tranche, presumably in early 2020. And of course, this also means that there's the potential that should a trade deal with China or other factors come into play, that maybe these last payments won't be made. But as we saw from last year, it's unlikely that all three won't be made. But a lot to be determined yet on this MFP program. If we jump to the next slide here, I'll cover the ad hoc disaster system. So this is the $19 billion bill that passed Congress recently, signed by the president. This is a kind of a typical ad hoc disaster response appropriations bill. So this is not USDA using CCC authority. This is Congress providing a chunk of appropriations for these disasters. What we know from the language, so I guess one of the bottom lines on this, again, is there's still a lot unknown because there's a lot of flexibility at USDA to implement this, and exactly how this goes into play, we're still a little bit uncertain about a few things. What we do know is that Congress put in a $3 billion pot of funding to add on to or top off, or top up, if you will, prevent planting insurance. It says in the statute that that the Secretary can go up to 90% of the prevent planting insurance. So instead of the 55%, you could go up as high as 90%. For those that have prevent plant, or up to 70%. Strange enough, for those that did not purchase crop insurance. The reality is this is a $3 billion pot, so they are going to have to spread that across all the prevented planting acres. So it is really, really, really unlikely, if not impossible, for 90% to ever be reached. But it is likely that some increase in the prevent plant payment for those counties, and this is the other key issue that we're waiting to find out, is exactly which counties this will qualify, or in which counties will this top off on prevent plant qualify. It reads in the statute, and I took a screenshot of the provision in the bill for those that really like to read legislative language. It says in the bill it appears in the bill to tie this very closely to a list of disasters. So Hurricanes Michael and Florence, other hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, typhoons, volcanic activity, snowstorms, and wildfires in the calendar years 2018 and 2019. So presumably those disaster counties listed because of those events are the ones in which this potential top-off of prevent planting will be available. And they also include some provision in that where there's a revenue policy, they can use the harvest price if it's higher. And I believe for last year that only cotton and wheat had a higher harvest price than the projected price, and so those crops, again, it could be a add to this sort of booster on prevent plant. But much like the MFP program, and we just did a rough example of what this might mean. I caution that last bullet there, that they up to 90%. That's not going to happen. Nobody's going to see the 612 on that. But it just gives you a sense of how this would play into. So it would be the same kind of prevent plant, that instead of a 55% of your 85% revenue coverage, it would be topped off from there. But again, a lot to be determined, a lot of flexibility for the Secretary to sort out exactly where this is going to go and how much of an increase that will be. So we will continue to monitor, and Gary's mentioned we've got a couple more of these webinars coming up. Hopefully we'll get some more detail, either in the form of an actual regulation or a notice that helps us understand better exactly how these programs are going to work individually, and frankly, how they're going to work as for those counties where they both might come into play. And with that, I'll hand the mic back and listen to the wisdom that Gary has for us this morning.
Thank you, Jonathan. And here's how we're going to handle the policy situation right now. As we're moving through this, I'm going to build in an MFP payment, and I'm using $50. There's nothing sacred about that number other than that. If we look at last year, that's about what people averaged in Illinois. So, but we don't know that number. I will not be putting on a higher payment for prevent plant simply because there's a lot of uncertainties, and I don't know how many counties that's going to be applied to. So we're not going to put any additional prevent plant payment in there. If you believe this prevent plant thing is going to happen, the prevent plant option becomes more attractive. And I'm going to take their word at it that if you plant a cover crop, it's going to be a minimal payment, so we're not going to look at it. So there we go. That's our uncertainty. I'm going to talk a little bit about farmer decision, and I'm going to divide this out again. So I'm assuming here you still have corn acres that you haven't planted, and you have intended corn acres. Should I keep planting corn if I have an RP policy? And if you're planting corn right now, you're betting that Todd's scenario of a higher prices are correct. Because if you look at what prices are being offered right now, you probably should stop planting. So that's what you're doing. If you have an intended soybean acre, we'll go through, should I switch to corn? Which is a question that has come up, number one there. Should I plant soybeans after the soybean final planting date? And if I have ARP for both corn and soybeans, what should I do? And the answer to that is plant something, and you're probably going to plant as much corn as you possibly can until it gets too late. Again, just reiterate where we're at. We have reached the final plant date for corn in all of Illinois, June 5th for most of you. So we're 7 days after that. Remember, your guarantee is going down 1% per day. So roughly, if you bought an 85% coverage level, you would have an 80% coverage level today. And by next week, it'll be down to 75%. We're reducing that RP guarantee throughout this period, so that's going to reduce the incentives to plant corn. Our prevent plant payment stays the same throughout all of this. We are close to getting to the final plant date, June 15th for Northern Illinois, the yellow column counties on the right here. Which is this Saturday. So if we get to this Saturday and you don't have soybeans planted, you can take a prevent plant payment in Northern Illinois, June 20th for Central and Southern Illinois. Again, once we reach that late planting period, if you have an acre intended for corn, you can do four things. You can take the prevent plant payment on corn. You can still plant corn, number two on the right here. If you plant corn, remember your RP guarantee is going to go down. And you could plant soybeans on your intended corn acres. And I'm going to say stop. I would not be doing that. And again, those are for the reasons that Todd mentioned before. And he's getting ready to say something here, I think. But go ahead, Todd.
No, I know I've heard a lot of people talking about planting corn because they think of this $5 scenario. But everybody that plants corn thinking there's a $5 scenario is eating into the $5 scenario.
Yep.
And I think that needs to be remembered when you're out there planting.
Yep.
Yeah.
And soybeans, and again, coming that if you want to plant, but you got that, the corn prevent plant payment in most cases is $100 higher net return than planting soybeans at the prices we're looking at. So if you got a corn acre that you can take a prevent plant payment on, stop, do some calculations, use our planting module. But I would really caution against that. Again, the prevent plant payment, it's all available on RP, YP, and RP with harvest price exclusion. It's 55% of your guarantee. So 55% of your guarantee, and for soybeans, it's 60% of your guarantee. So those are the basics of it, and again, we're going to be coming back to those points as we look through at these decisions. All right, I just want to, and again, I'm going to summarize here where we're at again. All right, so your corn, if you have insurance, your projected price this year is $4. Our current December contract level is $4.40. That was yesterday. I don't know. It might be higher than that right now. And I would say that and again, the harvest price is the October DEES contract. I would guess that there's a very good chance that we'll have a harvest price above $4. So we're looking at a situation where if you have a yield loss, you're going to get priced at the higher of the harvest price, or higher of the harvest or projected price. Again, we're probably looking at that at being the higher of those. And your worst case scenario, if you plant corn, is you have harvest price at $4 and your yield is at or below your RP yield guarantee, which is generally about $100 and increasing compared to your prevent plant payment. Soybeans, we have the opposite situation. We have $9.54 projected price, and our current level is $8.80. So we're probably going to be getting crop insurance payments on soybeans, because that 880 is 92% of our 954. We're already cutting into the price decline is cutting into our guarantee, so we don't need as large of a price decline, or yield decline, excuse me. Again, if I listen to Todd, I would be expecting lower prices moving into this fall. And we'll see where that is. Again, you're likely thinking that RP provides a backstop against low revenue. So if you're planting soybeans, RP provides a backstop against that. And my calculations would say it's pretty good backstop for the first week or so after the final plant date. So that's sort of our situation now. Corn, we'll get payments if we have a yield decline below our coverage level, because our harvest price will be above our projected price, and soybeans, our harvest price likely is below our projected price. Again, I'm going to go through. I'm now going to focus again. We've seen this slide before. We're going to go in acres intended for corn. Here, this slide shows for different trend-adjusted APH yields, 220, 200, 180, 160, what we would be putting in, what I would be putting in as an expected yield at this point. This is based on some work out of Iowa University of Iowa, or Iowa State University, excuse me, that looked at yield declines on corn. Obviously, that's north of here. And, by the end of June, they were seeing yields about 50% of their maximum potential. So you can see here that based on that, we would be putting expected yield here of 171 for 220, and you see where those are at. Those yields are below our 85% yield guarantee. So, and that yield guarantee is going down at 1% every day. So right now we're above it, and these 80, 75, and 65 are below it. We get to next week, June 19th, our 85% will be still above it, and our 80% will be close. In many cases, if you have a high coverage level, your yield guarantee going down is probably more important for what's happening to your expected revenue than what's happening to expected yields right now. And remember, our guarantees are going 1% down for the 20 days of the period. After June 26th in most of Illinois, it will be 60%. And at that point in time, the risk, if you bought an 85% coverage level, you have a 50% coverage level, roughly. And so things will get pretty iffy then. And just one other thing, I'm going to use this example a lot. Let's say we have 85% RP at 220 bushels per acre. Our prevent plant payment there would be $411. Our net return here is $371. $411 prevent plant payment, and I'm putting in $40 of cost here. That cost includes the crop insurance payment and weed control cost. You plant any sort of cover crop, that number is probably going to go up. Again, maybe the MFP, minimal MMP, will cover that cost. That's $371. Comparable soybean payment, you're looking at $276 net return. And this is almost always the case. We are almost always looking at the corn prevent plant payment being roughly $100 higher in net return than the soybean payment, which means you want to take corn prevent plant payments rather than soybeans. and knowing your intended or what your eligible acres for corn prevent plant payment becomes key. So you want to take corn prevent plant payments if you're going to take any. And if I'm looking at returns right now, I would say corn, either plant or corn prevent plant, has a much higher return than soybeans prevent plant or planting soybeans. So you probably want to shade your way to corn rather than soybeans at this point in time still. Again, this slide shows this blue line is the prevent plant payment, and this red line here is $4 cash price, $4.25 harvest price. We built in our yield guarantee going down, our revenue RP guarantee going down, yields going down. You'll notice a little kink right here. This is when RP begins to pay. You can see we're right about here. And at $4 cash price, $4.25 harvest price, it's below the prevent plant. You got to be hoping for full cost that you get a $4.50 cash price, something like $4.75 harvest price, and here's a $5.25 harvest price. So if you're planting today, full cost, you're betting on higher prices than we see in the market today. And maybe that's a good bet, maybe that isn't. So, yeah, but that's your bet, and that bet gets worse as we are. Our RP guarantee is going down, so we expect less revenue. Again, that's one situation. This happens to be for a 220 trend-adjusted APH yield. We look at those as you lower the APH yields, those returns, the difference between RP, plant net return, and prevent plant return goes down. So as your APH yield goes down, the concern here about planting or getting planting looks worse as you get lower trend adjusted APH yields. One item to note is that if you take a prevent plant payment on corn, you can plant that acre to a cover crop, and soybeans works as that cover crop. So if you have soybean seed, you can plant that on a corn prevent plant acre, and that will be a cover crop. I don't know if that meets the definition of a harvestable cover crop. And we have a question here. Soybean is a cover, why not harvested? If harvested, may void. Well, so you have to, if you're planting soybeans as a cover crop, and I got from RMA, it said that was okay. You have to be very careful on that because you can't harvest it, and if you're planting any sort of cover crop on a corn acre or a soybean acre, you cannot hay or graze it before November 1. So you cannot hay or graze it before November 1. The situation, if you've got some of your nitrogen and pesticides come down, you plant later in the season. So where we're at there on this is that we need higher prices in most cases to be justifying planting corn. That may happen. That may be a good bet. Let me just do this one other time. I'm doing this with a 200 bushel APH yield, and let me just take an 85% coverage level. If we have a 200 bushel trend adjusted APH yield, our prevent plant payment is $374, net returns $334. My worst case net return if I plant is 165, which is considerably below this return. I would need a cash price of $5 or $5.25 harvest price for the net return from planting to be above what I can get for prevent plant. If on the other hand, this is all cost. If I have only $350 cost yet, and I'm building in a $50 MFP payment, you still would consider planting here. All right. Again, just coming back, you got a corn intended planting acre, and you can take that as prevent plant. I would be very skeptical of planting soybeans on that. Again, I'm just giving an example here. I have a $371 net return from prevent plant. Just run through the numbers. If I can get a 50 bushel yield, 850 price, I got 425 revenue from crop revenue. That would generate an insurance payment, $77 if we have a 65 trend adjusted APH yield, and I plant it before the final plant date. I'm building in a $50 MFP payment. Again, I don't know that, but I'm just building in what we did last year. $260 of cost putting this on, $292 to revenue, and that is considerably below that net return from taking the prevent plant payment. So we keep getting questions about cover crops. Cover crops, you can plant a cover crop. You cannot, and after the late planting period, we'll check this out. We will provide some more detail on cover crop issues. We'll put all of that. We'll run this all by RMA and run this by, and we'll put some more information on Farmdoc on cover crops and what that all means. Todd, you look like you're saying something here.
No, I was just leaning.
All right. No, Todd's not saying
I'm
something.
into this presentation.
All right. So let me go on. Now I'm going to look at, you got an acre intended for soybeans. You got to, and we're again, we're coming into this period, June 15th, which is this Saturday in Northern Illinois. You will have a late planting period from June 16th to July 10th, and Central and Southern Illinois will have June 20th. You have the following decisions. You can prevent plant payment on soybeans. You can plant soybeans, and actually you can plant corn on those acres. If you're going to plant corn, though, you have to have all your intended corn acres planted, because you're not going to take a prevent plant payment and then plant corn on soybean acres. So if you're doing the third option, you don't have any corn prevent plant payments. All right, if you're going to plant acres on soybeans, you should have all your intended corn acres planted, no prevent plant. And corn likely has a higher return than soybeans, but not for very long. And you've got to believe that the harvest price will be close or above $5. I mean, that's what you're betting on right now if you're planting a corn intended soybean acre to corn. That could happen, but as Todd would say, the more people that do that, the less chance that there is of a $5 harvest price. Right?
Yeah, it'll be tough. I mean, if the acres don't get taken out of the crop, it comes back to yield. And just how bad will the yield be this year? So we may see a price rally that's delayed a little bit if, we have the acres, but the yield hit comes in later in the marketing year.
So just show you, this is our one estimate of corn returns with no land and overhead cost. And you can see right around June 20th, by our calculations, those cross. And we're building in a $4.25 corn price, a $9 soybean price. And if you raise that price, this line goes up. Again, if you're going with corn, you're bearing much more risk than soybeans. But again, so if you got an ARP policy, you're going to have to plant something. I'm not exactly sure that you're not going to be in a bad situation. I mean, if you plant corn, harvest prices are above their projected price, and there's any sort of yield decline in the county, those ARP payments might make payments this year. All right. So before the final plant date, you should plant soybeans on that if it's economic, from an economical and insurance standpoint. After the final plant date, June 15th to June 20th, your options are to take that prevent plant payment or continue to plant soybeans. Again, we're thinking of northern Illinois here, the end of the week, central and southern Illinois mid next week. You can take a prevent plant payment. Let me just give you an example here. So I calculate a 65 trend adjusted APH yield. There's 276 net return from planting soybeans. It's a certain payment, no impact on APH. If I plant soybeans, I will impact APH. And here's my break even under full cost, 536. I have to have 536 revenue to cover planting that acre. That is the $276 of prevent plant payment. I got to get at least enough revenue to cover this. Plus, I'm estimating that you're going to spend $260 on soybeans to plant it. So that's where that 536 comes from. Subtracting $50 MFP. And if you're looking at this, there's a lot more certainty. That $50 implies a lot more certainty that actually exists. So $486 of revenue. Where that leaves us is an $8 cash price, 60 bushel of acre would cover that. $8.50 cash price, 57 bushels would cover that. $9 cash price, 54 bushels would cover that. Which then raises, all right, if we have the 65 bushel trend adjusted APH yield, are these reasonable numbers to expect? Double crop yields in southern Illinois have been 10 bushels below our full crop season for the last several years. So maybe those are reasonable expectations. If you have a high level of RP coverage, 85 to 80%, we actually would be in a position where crop insurance would make payments at a 55 bushel yield. So we would be looking sort of at a $290 net return. Again, this is 85% coverage level, 294 here, which is above our net return from soybean prevent plant. There's probably, if you got RP crop insurance, there's probably little risk in planting soybeans. I mean, you're planting soybeans versus taking the prevent plant payment. There's some risk that you would have a revenue below taking prevent plant, but not a lot, particularly early on in the period. But as we get later after that prevent plant period, it about 8 days. In this case, it goes below taking the prevent plant payment, and again, that's occurring because our yields are going down somewhat, but more importantly, our revenue guarantee is going down somewhat. For soybean decisions, I would suggest you look at the net return from the prevent plant payment and just calculate what your cash price would look like. And if you're $9.54 projected price on 40-cent basis, we're looking at you could get a $9.14 cash price. Our yield guarantee, if you take your trend adjusted APH, multiply it by your coverage level, and multiply it as you get going. This 2% here go down 1% per day during the 25-day late period, 54 bushels per acre. Your cash insurance guarantee is then $494, and again, that number is going to go down essentially 1% per day. $494 plus $50 minus $260 net cost, $283. Again, comparing those two. Oops, I'm sorry, I went too fast there. You're probably they're really close to one another, and again, they're going to go down. I don't know if we're going to get a higher price than $9.14. Your numbers would say, but I'm looking at Todd here.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would need a fundamental change in the trade environment to see that kind of number come to fruition. That's my opinion.
Yeah. So, So I think that leaves us in a situation where planting soybeans, you probably, for this year, you're probably not risking much planting soybeans versus taking the plant payment. You're going to probably lower your APH yield because that yield will enter the APH yield. And so yeah, so there I could see somebody making a decision to plant soybeans, and I can also see a person making a decision not to plant soybeans, and it's a pretty close call. Actually, if we reach the final plant date, and yeah, and it can go either way. So, just to summarize here where we're at. Should I keep planting corn if I have an RP policy? Probably not for much longer. We're just getting to the point where those RP guarantees are going to be getting lower, and we're going to be adding a lot of risk. Again, if you're planting corn today, you're betting on $5 corn price somewhere in the future. So to make that, particularly if you have to put full cost in there. Intended soybean acres, could I switch it to corn? And again, I've heard a number of farmers talk about it. Maybe you're adding to the risk because you'll have more of a downside and don't wait too long. Number two, should I plant soybeans after soybeans final plant date? I would say a while. I could see you going either way. I don't see a lot of risk in planting soybeans, and I also don't see a lot of upside either. If you have ARP, what should you do? Plant something. I don't know. We're getting to the end of where corn. I mean, if we plant corn next week, you're going to be pollinating late July, early August. You're going to go black layer in October.
Maybe later.
Depending
on what variety you're using.
Yeah, and
you're exposed to frost, and drying costs could be astronomical.
Yeah.
So.
But you're going to have to plant something, and so again, you're in a difficult position. We have a question here. If you take prevented plant, you don't get the enterprise unit discount. All right. So if you take prevented plant on all your corn acres, you will not. If you signed up for enterprise units, which typically have lower crop insurance premium costs than optional or basic units, you will be taking preventive planting, but paying the higher of the basic and optional unit because you do not meet the planting requirement for the enterprise unit. That enterprise unit, to get the enterprise unit discount, you have to plant at least 20 acres or 20% of your acres in your unit, whichever is less, in 2 sections. If you don't meet that planting requirement, you will get the higher of the basic or optional unit. So yes, that is, we had that comment, and that is absolutely that is absolutely true. We have another question.
Is this the end of the slides?
Yeah, I got one more slide, but go ahead, Todd.
The question is, do you have a sense of what is going on in Illinois? Are farmers going to take prevent planting corn? I think there's going to be a substantial number of prevent plant corn acres in Illinois. But based on the last planting progress report, we're still looking at over 3 million acres of corn to plant. I personally would be surprised if at least half of that doesn't get prevent planted, but you never know. So that's my sense, but Gary, you may have a different
Yeah,
sense.
I would agree with you, Todd. I think even in central Illinois, for example, where we're at, we saw a lot of planting this past week. So, but I still think there's going to be some prevent plant, maybe 10% of the acres in central Illinois where there were fields with drowned outs that got carved out and take prevent plant. Northern Illinois, there's just some areas where
It's horrible.
where it's horrible, and there is no option but to take prevent plant. You go over into Ohio and Indiana, the northern parts, no planting has taken place in some of those areas, and there's going to be a lot of prevent plant there as well. Another question is, any thoughts of grain sorghum in the mix? Here's what I would say. I know very little about grain sorghum. My guess is if you have not signed up that crop for crop insurance, you will not have a crop insurance policy. So if you didn't sign up for grain sorghum, you will not have a crop insurance policy. I don't know. You, Todd.
I got no thoughts on putting Milo in it. No.
All right. One other question that we have, and I have a slide for this. Could you speak also on Colony ARC versus PLC with SCO? If you have SCO and want to keep coverage, you need to indicate that you intend to take PLC on your July 15th acreage report for crop insurance. So you can get SCO. You will have to indicate that you intend to take PLC on your July 15th acreage report for crop insurance. That first bullet point does not bind you with your decision at FSA. So you this year can change your intention after July 15th and take ARC County. That will only happen in this year, and we haven't looked at the commodity title decisions at this point in time. But if we have higher corn prices, we were thinking before all this happened that PLC was the choice. But that may not be the case, and we'll look at that after we get all of this marketing stuff out of the way and figure out what levels we're looking at for our market year average prices for 2019. We have another question here. Can I get coverage for soybeans if I didn't sign it up by March 15th? And the answer is no. If you have not signed up for soybean cover crops, or excuse me, soybeans, you will not have a payment, or you will not have insurance coverage on those acres. Another question that's come in: what happens to SCO payment if you drop PLC for 2020? Can you keep SCO? All right. What's going to happen here is that you're going to, for crop, when you fill out your crop insurance acreage report, you're going to indicate whether if you signed up for SCO that you intend to take PLC. The actual decision made with the FSA will not be bound by that. So you can get the SCO payment and you can choose to take ARC later on. Again, I think it would be up to this point, until we see a market response, it's probably a pretty good intention to take PLC. That may change after that July 15th acreage reporting date as we see what this marketing outlook can do. All right, so here's a question. And I'll read this and Todd can answer this. After all you showed us, does Todd still believe that soybean acreage will be higher than USDA current estimate?
I do. I do believe it will be. I think you're going to see some switching go on. It really does, for me, come down to how much prevent plant's going to be taken in soybeans. I think that's come down quite significantly in the last couple of weeks as we've dried out. And how many of those corn acres maybe went to soybean acres? It's not going to be, I don't think you're going to see that 4 or 5 million acres. You've heard some people say that. I'm probably more in the 1 to 2 million acre range. So yes, I do think that, and we don't need them at all. But I understand the decision completely.
Yeah, so this is my observation. We ag economists sitting here look at the prevent plant payment and say farmers should take it, and farmers have a bias to plant. I mean, you're a producer, and so we see that. So I would agree with Todd. We're probably going to see more. I would caution you, though, to plant more soybeans, particularly if you have a corn prevent plant payment. And run the number. Just before you do that, just do some math, do a budget, and see where it comes out. Can you expand on the MFP payment regarding not more than 2018 planting acres verbiage? All right. So the way the bill or the way the regulations were written, you cannot get paid more on 2019, on more acres on 2019 than you planted in 2018 to MFP covered crops. There are no regulations released on this yet, so I'm going to give you my interpretation of that. I think that's going to be applied on an FSA farm basis. So if you've increased acres and you have another farm, you will get whatever acreage was planted on that FSA farm. That again, I think what the press releases said that's a pretty sure thing. Again, we have not seen those regulations, so we don't know. Is this presumed to be only based on what a producer actually farmed in 2018? And no, it isn't. So if you've expanded your farm, you will get those acres that were planted last year on that farm. That provision there was likely put in there to keep sod from being broken up and planted to MFP covered crop to get the MFP payment this year. All right, so we can have here's another question. So we can have PLC for 2019 and allowed to keep both ARC and SCO payments for 2019. All right, let me go through this again. All right, if you are only eligible for SCO in most years if you take PLC. In 2019, you have not made that decision yet. I mean, you have not made that decision yet, and the decision point for making PLC decisions will be after August. It will be, I think it will begin sometime in September. So you haven't made that decision yet. So this year, if you signed up for SCO and you had to sign up by March 15th, if you signed up for SCO, what's going to determine whether or not you can have that SCO payment is what you're going to say on your July 15th acreage report. And there, if you have SCO, we will indicate that you intend to take PLC. All right. That's a crop insurance acreage report, and it will not be binding on your final PLC decision. We will go over that we'll even have slides prepared on that for two Wednesdays from now. And as you can see, there are a lot of questions on those issues. We have a number of questions on cover crops. We will put together a little article on that and make that available on Farmdoc Daily. So look for that in the future. Todd, you got anything you want to say?
No, I just appreciate everybody tuning in. I think we're at the end of the line here. Hopefully everybody has a good day.
Yeah, hopefully you found this information useful, and we appreciate your time.